Hello and welcome to Vulns Unleashed.
Today we do have a very special treat for you. Of course, we always have a special treat, our host here, Brian Clark. But we have a very special guest today, and that is our friend Steve. He's going to teach us a lot about how PHP and Dompdf, some intrinsic vulnerability. Developer Steve has, gathered the best information that he's found, and he's a PHP expert. Yeah, we're gonna really just dive into it and learn as much as we can, and take a look at a POC and just sort of understand how this happened.
For folks that maybe aren't familiar with the show, what we do with Vulns Unleashed is we pick out one of the latest vulnerabilities, because there's plenty of them that go around each month, right? Each week, each day even. And we take a deeper dive and look into what's that vulnerability all about, so that we can understand what it's kind of causing, what's the issue there, and how it can be exploited and used to somebody's advantage to do malicious things potentially. And then maybe even look at some demos and proof of concepts around that vulnerability, so you can really drive home like how this is actually working and implemented. Especially beneficial for me as a developer to understand these things, so that I can maybe avoid using these libraries if it's an open source vulnerability, or maybe processes or executables that I might be relying on in my systems that I'm hosting my apps on or whatever, right? That type of stuff. This is super helpful and interesting in that way. And Kyle brings on that security practitioner and some developer background experience as well. And then same for developer Steve, as Kyle mentioned, having some PHP experience as well, to give us specifics into today's vulnerability that we're going to be focusing on for Vulns Unleashed. And that is, it's called Dompdf.
That's correct. Friend? Yeah. And yeah, I've been coding, like you were saying, like I've been coding PHP for many years now, since version 4, and we're currently at version 8, although we did kind of skip 6, but that's a long story. They just skipped 6, literally. But yeah, I've been using PHP for a number of years now, and there's some things that, well, as a senior developer, I always found there were some mundane tasks. I mean, let's face it, development, there's some stuff you just really don't like doing, and PDF creation is totally one of those. I am not afraid to say that. So like this library is super handy for that, like being able to build up PDFs super quick.
So yeah, people really do look really deep into these sort of, it's the same thing with file upload, right? Like if I'm attacking a service and there's an upload tool, I'm going to look at what sort of formats it accepts. Does it actually not accept the formats that it says it doesn't? And what can you get this file upload service to actually do, right? So I think, yeah, stuff like this is always fascinating to me from a security researcher perspective, like you were saying, Brian, but also as you were saying, like from a developer perspective, as somebody who has written applications and who has had to worry about this. So yeah, I think I'm very interested in hearing, because developer Steve has a great blog post that I was hoping we could share. Actually,
you all were talking about a blog post that Mr. Developer Steve over here had put together for Dompdf. Shall we bring that on? Are we ready?
Yeah, definitely. I think let's share that.
All right, cool.
I'm even wearing my hacker hoodie as well. So,
yes. What about your hacker voice?
Oh, you want me to do the voice?
Yeah.
Hang on.
Bring out all your vulnerabilities.
All right, so yeah, this is the blog post that I wrote. This one is like, I mean, all vulnerabilities are scary to some degree, but this one in particular, like knowing how far and wide this particular library is used is really bad. I mean, doubly so because Dompdf, like, is a PDF generator that uses, takes HTML, styled HTML, and outputs a PDF. Predominantly used in e-commerce websites, and PHP still powers a good 70% of the internet.
Let's say somebody's just doing remote code execution, and they're trying to figure out how to get a foothold on your box. If they do gain that foothold on your box, then they can sort of pivot throughout your systems and wreak all sorts of havoc. So it's really important to have experts like Developer Steve, weigh in on stuff like this when there isn't a patch, right? When there's no path to remediation. And I think stuff like that is just it's few and far between, right? So we're kind of getting it from the horse's mouth here. So yeah, without further ado, I just want everyone to know, everyone who might be a developer and they're like, oh, I always hear RCE thrown around, but like, why is it so bad? It's because eventually, once a hacker, establishes a foothold, they're able to, do arbitrary stuff, right? Eventually, that's the goal, right? Elevate that privilege, pivot throughout your networks, and figure out what the perimeters of what they can do are. So that's why this is really bad.
In any case, so Dompdf is the library name in PHP to help developers create PDFs. Then there's a vulnerability in it.
Yes.
And for everybody to like level set, what is this vulnerability causing or doing in that library?
So yeah, it is a library that helps create PDFs from styled HTML, which I mean, ultimately amazingly handy. I've used it many times through my developer origin story, as I like to think of it. This is the repository. It's immensely popular. It's been around since, well, it's been on Composer, which is PHP's package manager, since 2013. And as you can see, it's got like 8,000 stars. It's actually used by 59,000 like repositories as a dependency. Literally, it turns styled HTML or just regular HTML chunks into straight PDF. And I've got an example of how it's supposed to work, or how it does work, and then how the vulnerability itself works. Because the vulnerability happens through some injected CSS. And we can step through that as well. On the Composer page, so this is how most folks will use it, is literally just Composer install, similar to npm or pip install or any other repository manager. But it's got 49,000 installs, 449 dependents through Composer. And if we look through the dependents, there's like PHP spreadsheet, for example, 66 million installs alone, which is used by other projects, and other projects use their projects. And yeah, it's pretty big. It's something we kind of see with a lot of these vulnerabilities, is the flow-on effects through ecosystems. But this one in particular tends to reach far and wide across the internet. We do have a working demo. Should we tempt the demo people early in the morning and see if we can get it running?
I think so, because we covered what it is, what it's doing, this library. We mentioned that the vulnerability is an RCE, remote code execution, but I think to help drive that home for people that maybe that's new, seeing it in action is really going to help.
That's always my favorite part too. And like you said at the start, like as a developer, understanding the vulnerability at its most granular level helps to prevent them to some degree, because like once I know like what I'm looking for, I know not to do that. So I have built this into our PHP Goof app, which is it's built coming along nicely. I have 3 stars now, so if anyone's watching and they want to go and like star the project and maybe try it themselves, like please feel free. I would love that. But it does have 3 vulnerabilities in there now. So for those who are not familiar with our Goof apps on the Snyk Labs repository,
Minus has a really good point about like how much this stuff has changed. Steve, I'm curious on your perspective on this, like, because this is like a seasoned, prolific package. So like on a scale of like 1 to 10, 10 being like log4j for PHP, like how bad is this for people who are using this in like client-facing services? Everyone could probably benefit from a demo, folks. If you have any questions, do drop them in chat.
I've already got this one documented in there, and links to the blog posts and all the relevant security pages and whatnot. So this is the Goof app. This is the PHP to-do Goof app. Similar to our other ones, it's literally just a to-do list item generator, holder, keeper, demo. So I can do test, for example, and it will save it in the database output. There's a bunch of stuff you can do with this, and once you've got it in there, so you can edit, you can delete, pretty standard functions. And I've since added for this particular vulnerability, PDF generation, which, as you would expect, does PDF. Oh, there was a moment where I thought that wasn't going to work, but it did. This is good. On the code side of things, let me make that a bit bigger. It's pretty simple. I've got that particular function sitting in its own file. It's just called pdf.php. It calls in the library as expected, but what it's actually doing is grabbing the information from that to-do item that's created and then sending it over as a GET request. And you could do this as a post, or just sending over like an item number and then pull it out of the database on the PDF generated side. Like, it wouldn't matter how you did this, you're still going to get the same result when we get to the vulnerability part. Like I was talking about at the start, this particular library takes HTML and outputs it into the PDF, which is really handy because as a dev, you can see there, like I could H1 style the title or a title and then load that into the HTML output, which then outputs the PDF, which you can, like, pretty easy to do. Anyway, you can pick through the code yourself. It's all available on the GitHub in the pdf.php page. So as part of that, like I can do the same thing to inject CSS or a CSS file, which is essentially how this particular vulnerability works. Is in CSS we can load in font files. And we'll look through how the library handles this, but the library itself will actually store those custom font styles into a font cache.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
This works because there's a way to embed arbitrary PHP code inside of font files?
Yes, which then caches on the server inside a font folder, basically, and gets indexed by the library and then stored for future use.
Wow.
Are these like TTF font files or a different format font files?
Yeah, basically we create a font file. So this is regular Arial, for example. I wanted to use this as a comparison because I've actually created a vulnerable font file as part of this demo as well. So this is regular Arial. It's got some basic meta in there, which obviously font systems use, or font systems use to hold licensing, hold names of the fonts, like where it's used, and of course then the character sets. Here's one I prepared earlier. So this is the gotcha font file, which is in the exploits folder. So you can have a look if anyone wants to have a look themselves. But essentially, I've created a shell, literally a shell font. There is no characters in this at all because I didn't need them, and it made the font file smaller. So I stripped all those out. The real magic happens in the copyright. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So PHP info brackets is a function that basically gives you a whole bunch of system information from PHP servers. And in the wrong hands, yeah, that's not good. But you could easily swap this out and do a command line executable. Like you could do a database dump. You could do anything you wanted in here, anything at all. Basically, we create this malicious font, which I've called gotcha/normal OTF. Now, it's really important to note here, and the original security researchers didn't mention this, which cost me about an hour of working out. The name here is super important when you're creating your font. So the name on the actual font file, which is called gotcha normal, because I didn't know what else to call it, and that seems like not very malicious, has to match the font file, the font name style sheet. So here you can see gotcha, and then it's font weight normal. When you in Composer install this particular library in the vendor folder, which is where all the Composer installs go at the project root for PHP Composer, in the Dompdf folder, there's a font cache, and so there's some default fonts installed in here. And this is basically where that font file will get loaded, providing we can get the PDF reader to basically read it. So the only other one component to this is, and this is where the original researchers got a bit creative, because the font file on its own will not execute. What they actually did was you open the font file up, you grab the code out, and you store it in a .php file, which you actually use as part of the font injection. As you can see here, the SRC is loading directly from the raw GitHub file, which is literally what we just stepped through. I've got the code to inject at the bottom in that vulnerability section. So all we have to do is load that in as a gotcha item, like so. Click the PDF. So as you can see now, that PDF's just created again, but this time it's executed this little hack a little addition that I've added in. So it's using the library itself to get the font metrics. You look for a font file, a font code loaded into the font cache called gotcha normal. And then if it finds it, then it basically builds a link for you and replaces whatever content it should have shown and gives you the link to where it actually is. So if I click that link now, that's a PHP info. Ta-da! And now we've remote code executed. If we have a look now back into that folder location, you can see, or I don't know if you can see it, but there's a file created there called gotcha_normal and then a hash string. So, and this is the tricky caveat part, because you have to know that particular hash string to be able to execute it remotely. Now, remember that when there's an update, and this is where keep your you should be scanning your package manifest with Snyk anyway. But we'll be able to alert you that there's an update, and you can make that writable again, so that you can get that update out. Always remember that. Please remember that.
What was the timeline like for this whole thing? Like how long has I mean, obviously it's still not fully patched right now, so it's still out in the wild, but how long has this been sitting out there?
That's a good point, because yeah, this one, so it only just recently got publicly disclosed, only because the maintainers, and nothing against the maintainers on the original GitHub, on the GitHub project, but yeah, the original disclosure happened in October. So the security research group sort of reached out to maintainers privately through their security policy and said, hey, we found this, we think we found this thing, here's what we found, here's how it works, like, etc. You need to patch it. That was in October last year, and so it just recently went public disclosure because they weren't responding, they weren't doing anything about it.
So Kyle, is there anything else that we wanted to cover regarding this vulnerability for this episode of Vulns Unleashed?
Well, I think we have, hit a lot of the main points. I think we do have a fixed PR, right, Developer Steve? Do we want to look at the fixed PR and like kind of go into like how this happened, from a maintainer's perspective for all of our maintainers out there?
Ad hoc things. Yeah, I'm keen. I actually haven't looked at it yet, so yeah, let's look. See if we can.
Oh, sorry. I thought I definitely didn't mean to drop that on you. I saw the link in the run of show, so I just kind of assumed we would hit that. So that is my apology.
No, that's all right. No, I've opened it, but I haven't looked at it yet. So let's take a look-see. Let's see what it's doing here. They took out this, which is doing things with that local file save into path extension, using the PHP info extension, string to lower, path info, path URL. Yeah, okay, so that's just storing the file. Yeah, this might be why it hasn't been released yet. This doesn't fix it. I don't think it does, but I'd have to try it. But
maybe it's a piece of the bigger picture, perhaps.
What this looks like they're doing is, so where in our version, you all can't see that, but I'm just talking through it. It's either going to save one of two files. So if I wasn't doing that CSS, if we weren't doing that CSS thing with the PHP file, it actually only saves a UFM file, which is like a font file type. So because it's a PHP file, though, it was actually saving a .php. What it looks like they're doing here is just creating a font file and a UFM file. So maybe that will stop the PHP from being created. The way I would long-term fix this is just remove the ability for anyone to be able to do a custom style sheet PDF generation. Because ultimately, if I'm doing e-commerce invoices, in invoice creation, why would I need it?
Right.
It doesn't need to be there. So
it should stay the same all the time, right?
Remove it. Yeah, or at least give an option for this entire function to be removed, because I don't need it. And actually, I've looked through, I was wondering if this was the same, this was also an issue in NPM and some of the other ecosystems. There isn't many, I actually couldn't really find any that would allow this particular function at all. And even looking through some NPM ones just today, because I was also wondering if this was an issue across other ecosystems as well, but turns out not. This is very unique.
Out of curiosity, what the origin of that feature set to be added to, right? Maybe it's one of those preemptive optimizations, if you will, of adding features that weren't necessarily being requested or in demand, but you could potentially see the possibility of people wanting to have custom styles to generate these PDFs, whatever it is. It's just very interesting to find out, especially given the analysis that you've done, Developer Steve, for the other similar PDF libraries in other ecosystems that are out there don't offering that type of thing.
It's interesting how you're able to get code execution in the copyright field too. Hopefully we check the copyright fields of all the other PDF generation libraries. There's always something, right? So there's PwnKit, which I just shared a little bit of information on. That was the third vulnerability. That actually a character set, right? Custom character sets are how they're able to circumvent the arguments list, and basically you're able to get arbitrary code execution, privilege escalation, right? Through PwnKit or Polkit. So using PK exec, because of the way that C handles, arguments, and you're able to, basically, I think it's very interesting to see, how language, right, and like the way that users and ourselves, we interact with computers, right, through character sets, through font sets, etc. It's definitely interesting to see how it's all a lot more related to security than some people might think.
For me, it helps me grok things if I kind of reiterate what you all shared with me. So we learned about Dompdf, that it's a library in PHP that helps you generate PDF files, right? Which is a common use case in a lot of scenarios. One of them being like e-commerce, doing printouts and receipts and whatnot, right? That there's a vulnerability in that library that allows you to do which is an RCE, remote code execution, that'll let an attacker be able to exfiltrate sensitive information potentially out of these underlying systems that are hosting your, as the example before, we talked about the e-commerce site, let's say, right? Handling, financial transactions and whatnot. Then we looked at the demo to see exactly how it works. Developer Steve shared that great resource and repo he put together that allows us all to recreate and try this out ourselves. There currently isn't a released patch version of Dompdf for folks to use, but there are things you can do today to help prevent you from being susceptible to this vulnerability. And that is one, the suggestion by Developer Steve, which is to make your fonts read-only. Don't allow people to be able to enter in or indicate and define custom fonts that they would like to use for these PDF styling. And potentially two is pull in, because they do have a fix in the repo that I think Developer Steve wants to investigate further, but this fix is in the repo, just not released yet. Again, very special thank you to Developer Steve for joining us and helping us out, bringing his expertise to the table and helping us learn and educate ourselves a bit more. And thank you all for watching this, that tuned in live, that were chatting with us, asking questions, and engaging. And if you're watching this later, drop a comment below, subscribe, like, I don't know, smash the subscribe button or something. Hey, look at that. Look at Developer Steve's got all the cool.
We got to see that again. That again.
Run that back.
Run the
back.
Yeah.
I forgot to. There it is.
That's so great.
There we go.
I made that. I literally made that because there wasn't one.
If you enjoyed it and you want to see more of this type of stuff, we are streaming more and more on the Snyk Live Twitch account and on the Snyk YouTube account. So be sure to follow along there on the appropriate platforms. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us. You just watched another episode of Vulns Unleashed. And we'll be back again in the near future to deep dive into yet another vulnerability. Maybe it'll be PHP again. Maybe it won't. To be very clear, I'm not picking on PHP. It could be any programming language, ecosystem, and all that fun stuff. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day, wherever you are in the world, or, future of the world, as we have some folks here. And we'll see you next time. Peace out.